when I poll other Audubon societies to see what speakers they have, because why reinvent the wheel when it's already been created, right? And so Sam, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, he spoke maybe a year or two ago for Travis County Audubon, and you came highly recommended. And so I reached out to Sam last summer, and she said yes, she would speak to Fort Worth Audubon about the secret life of Whimbrels, which I am excited to find out more about them. They're more, but the background about Sam is Sam Wolfe is a shorebird biologist with Manomet Conservation Sciences, and I'm hoping we hear a little bit more about Manomet. Mrs. Wolfe has a master's degree in range and wildlife management from Texas A&M University. Whoop. Kingsville, and she lives in Rockport, Texas. Her career has focused on understanding bird migration and habitat associations. She's having worked across a variety of landscapes and geographies. So with that, I'll turn it over to Miss Sam Wolfe.
Well, thanks so much for that introduction. Can you guys hear me okay and see my presentation screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. And you don't see my notes there, right?
No.
Okay, nope. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here today. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. The title of my talk is The Secret Life of Whimbrels. I study this species migration through Texas, and I've also had the opportunity to study them on their nesting grounds in Alaska. This talk is mostly going to focus on all the really cool places that Whimbrel go throughout the year, but we'll also touch on how to identify them and just their overall life history. So that was a great introduction of myself. Luckily, I don't really like talking about myself, so I'll keep it brief here. I'm a shorebird biologist with Manomet, and I live in Rockport, Texas here on the coast. And I focus primarily on the conservation of shorebirds during migration. Like Debbie said, I've worked with all different kinds of species throughout my career in all different places, primarily focusing on monitoring and habitat management with a primary interest in migration. Also wanted to introduce my organization briefly. Manomet Conservation Sciences is a small nonprofit based in Plymouth, Massachusetts, but we have staff stationed across the entire Western Hemisphere, mostly working on shorebird conservation. So first, what is a shorebird? I get a lot of questions about cranes and egrets and things, so I wanted to clarify what is a shorebird. I know you guys are birders and might already know this stuff, but the word shorebird is a bit of a misnomer. Not all shorebirds live by the shore, but the term is mostly referring to all species that are genetically similar, belonging to the order Shoredriformes. So by the numbers, you can see we've got 81 species in the Western Hemisphere. 52 of those species are in North America. And in Texas, we've got about 30 species that regularly occur here. Most of the species belong to Shoredridae, which are the plovers, and then Scolopacidae. These are the sandpipers, the snipes, and the phalaropes. I won't get into too much of the nitty-gritty here, but what is not a shorebird, again, are the wading birds. So egrets and herons, ibis, crane, even skimmers. I once thought skimmers were considered a shorebird, but really they're more related to terns and gulls. So not a shorebird. So the thing that makes shorebirds such a cool group of birds is that they're really marathon flyers. They make these nonstop flights across entire oceans that take multiple days. About 20 species have been recorded making nonstop flights over 3,000 miles long. And to put that into context, that's the equivalent of traveling from Boston to San Francisco, and that's without using Google Maps, of course. So shorebirds are really, really skilled in this migration. The longest nonstop flight goes to the bar-tailed godwit, which you may have heard about, with a 9-day-long flight. These birds are on the move the majority of the year. Some species are migrating almost 9 months out of the year. So generally, shorebirds are going to be migrating north between March and May, and then they'll nest during June, and then start moving south, which fall migration occurs July through October approximately. But how do they do it? How are they able to travel such long distances? Well, shorebirds are really fast flyers. A lot of people don't know that. So golden plovers and whimbrel are known to fly between 50 and 60 miles an hour, and that's without a tailwind. A lot of these species that are traveling long distances are flying at night, and that helps them take advantage of the calmer and cooler air. And then traveling at night also helps them avoid aerial predators like falcons. And then their bodies have evolved to do these extreme distances as well. So some physiology and physical traits, their wings are long and pointed, and that helps reduce drag and increase lift. They put a lot of energy into building their fat stores and flight muscles. And then parts of their anatomy that they don't need at that time shrink, like their digestive and reproductive organs. Birds also use stopover sites. That's another critical way that they're able to do these large migrations. They're important sites along the flyway that they can stop and rest and refuel those fat reserves. So those sites have to be safe, and they have to have an abundance of food resources at them. So for species that nest in the Arctic or subarctic, once they get to Texas, they've already traveled about 5,000 miles or so, which is really crazy. We know these birds have come from somewhere else, but we might not always know where from. So we do have a few more species in spring here in Texas than in fall, because some species like white-rumped sandpiper and whimbrel, for example, only come through in spring. Some of the best places I've found to look for shorebirds in Texas are agricultural areas, and then also any sort of mud flat, whether that's man-made or natural. So shorebirds are declining. Some of you might know this. This paper that came out recently showed that shorebirds have declined about 37% since 1974, and that's one of the steepest declining groups of birds in North America. And then furthermore, you can see on this graph, it's broken down into what sort of shorebirds are declining and at what rate. And you can see that long distance migrant shorebirds are declining the most. So why are shorebirds declining? Well, it's not just one thing. It's a whole lot of things across a huge geography. So shorebirds are facing habitat loss and degradation. Climate change is continuing to create these big picture problems for shorebirds, including nesting habitat up in the Arctic. And then there's a lot of challenges that we face when trying to conserve shorebirds. First off is the fact they're kind of difficult to identify, you may have noticed. So even really skilled birders might avoid counting shorebirds. So data collection through citizen science can be limited. But I'll talk more about that later and how you might be able to help. So their life cycle also spans multiple continents, as I mentioned. So that creates another challenge for conservation when a lot of different countries and different groups need to work together. Now, this recent paper showed the change in population sizes for 28 species of shorebirds. So if a species point is below the 0 line, that means it's declining. And you can see that all but 2 species fit that criteria, and the whimbrel is included in that. This paper also found that the rate of decline is actually accelerating. So not only are these birds declining, but the rate of decline is getting quicker and quicker. So we're a little bit behind the 8 ball on shorebirds. Now moving on to whimbrel specifically, the bird of the hour. So its Latin name is Numenius hudsonicus, recently changed. And Numenius means new moon. So that refers to the crescent shape of the bill. That's a neat little fact that I enjoy telling people. It's a shorebird, so it belongs to the order Charagiformes, as I mentioned, and it is in the family Scolopacidae, including the sandpipers. It's also under the umbrella of a curlew. So the other curlew you might be familiar with in North America is the long-billed curlew, and we'll talk about how to differentiate these two in a moment. And then finally, whimbrel are a long-distance migrant. So this is what makes whimbrel super cool to me, and what we'll be talking about for the majority of this talk. But just to give you an idea, whimbrel in the Western Hemisphere here travel 20,000 miles in a year, which is really a huge feat. And then how to identify Whimbrel. First, notice that this is a medium to large bodied bird, and it's got this rich brown color. The plumage on Whimbrel doesn't really change much throughout the year, unlike some other shorebirds might. They've got these lines on the crown that I like to call racing stripes, and they also have a line going through their eye. Their bills are long and curved. That's maybe one of their more obvious characteristics. And then this is what Whimbrel look like in flight. They're extremely strong flyers with strong wing beats, and they have sort of a football shape to their body in flight. They also fly in flocks, especially when they're at these large stopover sites. And they will fly in V formation when traveling longer distances. So this is a really nice side-by-side that my colleague Alan took, showing the difference between long-billed curlew and Whimbrel. Both of these birds can be seen in the same habitats here on the Texas coast, and seasonality can also overlap. So you want to be careful and cautious when identifying curlews, but first look at the length of bill. But use caution here. Younger curlews can have shorter bills. And then it's hard to kind of see in this picture. It almost looks the opposite of what I'm about to say, but curlews have a very cinnamon brown color versus the plain sort of chocolate brown of Whimbrel. You can kind of see that cinnamon color on the thigh of the curlew. Also, long-billed curlews lack those racing stripes in the eye line, and then their legs are quite a bit longer. So because Whimbrel travel such great distances, they're using a variety of different habitats along the way. We'll talk about this as we go through the different places that they travel, but they generally prefer an open landscape like tundra, marsh, or even agriculture. And then as you can imagine, as their habitat is changing, so does their diet. The long curved bill is perfectly designed to reach down into burrows. So some key prey items that they like are fiddler crabs and crawfish, and also wolf spiders who have burrows. And then they will also eat berries at various different parts of their life cycle. So again, Whimbrel are declining. They're suffering global population declines. And this paper here shows that Whimbrel have declined by 80% since 1980. So that's a huge decline. And again, that decline is accelerating. Now we don't know all of the reasons why Whimbrel might be declining, so that's why we're trying to learn more about them. But we do know that Whimbrel are especially vulnerable because of their adaptation to specific food resources. So they're somewhat flexible in their diet, like I said, but they have that really long curved bill. There's only so much they can do to adapt to changing resources. They depend on coastal habitats during certain parts of their life, and humans also like the coast, right? So habitat is going away. And finally, they do experience hunting in the Caribbean islands and in South America, which we believe is likely a large limiting factor for them. And then there might be just additional reasons that we aren't aware of yet. So it's important that we're studying them across their entire life cycle. I did just want to mention the Eskimo curlew. This used to be one of the most common shorebird species in North America, but went extinct, unfortunately. So it's hard not to read about the Eskimo curlew and about its life history and look at its range and wonder if Whimbrel is potentially on the same trajectory. The last known sighting of one of these birds in North America was in Galveston in 1962. And the last known bird was shot in Barbados 1 year later. So hunting was obviously a factor, but at the same time, prairies along the mid-continent were being plowed under, and their principal food source, the Rocky Mountain grasshopper, was also disappearing because of it. So this is a species that no one was really paying attention to because there were just so many of them, but they were quickly slipping away right from underneath our noses. So that's just another reason why we need to be studying Whimbrel across their entire range and learning as much as we can right now before they go away. All right, some more background on Whimbrel. This is a population of Whimbrel that come through Texas. This is called the Mackenzie population. Whimbrel from this population utilize a loop migration strategy. So they're taking one route in the spring, which is the blue lines, and a different route in the fall, the pink, which you can see here. And any guesses why that might happen? If you guessed wind, you would be right. We believe that global wind patterns are likely influencing this sort of loop migration strategy. So you can see that a bird moving north from Texas to Alaska would have a tailwind if you look at the wind map here, but then they would have a headwind on the way back south. So having the wind at their back is really important. It allows them to fly these long distances and use less energy. So even crossing the Atlantic Ocean from Canada to Brazil is worth it if they've got a tailwind. And then these large white circles here are indicating large stopover sites. So these, again, are places where the birds are stopping to refuel their energy before moving on to the next leg of the trip. We're going to zoom into the Texas coast here, which you can see is a stopover site. And more broadly, the upper Texas coast into Louisiana. The Texas coast is oftentimes the first place a Whimbrel lands after a direct flight from Brazil, crossing the Gulf of Mexico. So we've also learned from our tracking data that if a bird doesn't land in this area specifically, maybe they land along the mid-coast, they'll eventually work their way up to this area within a day or so. We believe that over 10,000 Whimbrel, likely something more like 14,000 Whimbrel, are stopping here each April, and they stay for about 4 weeks. So we've been working in this area, the upper Texas coast area, for the last 4 years to learn more about how Whimbrel are using the area. And from that, we've been able to get estimates of the population, learn where they go at night and by day, see what they're eating, and who their predators are. We've done this by deploying GPS tags on birds in that area, and we've tagged nearly 60 Whimbrel here. We use a newer technology GPS tag, which has the ability to record very accurate location data as frequently as every second if we wanted it to. Now, everyone always wonders how we trap them. So I wanted to show that. We trap the birds primarily in rice fields during the early stages of rice growing. We use noose line traps that we've made with fishing line. So essentially the bird steps into the loop, and when it takes another step, it tightens around its leg, and we run in through the mud to secure the bird. And then once we have the birds in hand, we band them, attach a transmitter, and take measurements on the bird, and then release them and start watching their movements from a computer. We're able to see their movements throughout the entire year with these tags. So today we're going to follow one of those birds as it travels across the continents. This is kind of what we saw from the tracking data. This is just a snapshot of one season. Each color is a different individual, and you can see just how heavily they're using this area east of Galveston Bay. There's really only one line out of the area for each bird, and that's when they're leaving for the nesting grounds. You'll also notice a sort of funneling, which I'll talk about in a moment of what that is. So it really depends on the year and how much rain there's been and what resources are available. But the majority of the time, the birds during the day are spread out in these rice fields, feeding on little invertebrates in the soil. They'll also go into fallow rice fields and eat dewberries. So some years they really pack into these rice fields. One drought year, we counted 2,000 birds and 2,000 Whimbrel and 22 species of shorebirds in one field. I have some videos too that I'd like to show you of the birds feeding. And at nighttime, Whimbrels are congregating into these coastal wetlands to roost together. We've seen track birds fly something like 40 miles to go to roost, so it must be pretty beneficial to them if they're traveling that far. So that's what the funneling of those tracks are. The the birds are funneling down into that southern area on the map, and that's the roost site. So each evening and morning, when we're in the area, we count the birds as they're going to roost and leaving the roost. And that helps us get a general idea of how many birds are in the area. And the highest count that we've ever had in a single night is over 9,000 birds. Okay, so this is a bird that we have multiple springs worth of data on. We call this bird ECO, and we're gonna just kind of follow this bird as it travels around the Western Hemisphere. We're gonna start in Texas in April, since that's where we caught it. And this bird is primarily feeding in rice fields during the day. These rice fields are anywhere from bare and muddy to having very short rice growing. The birds really just need that soft ground with a lot of invertebrates in the soil to feed on. And we've also seen when invertebrates are down in a given year due to drought, the birds are really relying on dewberries a lot more. Okay, I did want to show you this video of a whimbrel. This is going to be a whimbrel feeding. Okay, yeah, you can see that. I'm hoping you'll be able to hear it, but if not, you'll be able to see it as well. But okay, great. And oftentimes I'll take the crawfish and fly away with it because the grackles are always trying to steal them. So that's kind of what Texas stopover looks like. Again, the birds are there for about 4 weeks or so, really fattening up. And then around early May, the birds are going to be making a direct flight from Texas all the way to the Prairie Potholes area in general. And we really don't know a whole lot about this part of the trip. We've never studied the birds in person in this area, but we believe they're using this area in a similar way to the Texas coast, where they're feeding in agricultural fields during the day and roosting in wetlands or on riverbanks at night. Now we're going to move on to the Arctic, where whimbrels nest. I had an amazing opportunity this couple Junes ago to go up to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is on the north slope of Alaska, to study whimbrel during their nesting season. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this part of their life history because it's probably the most secret part of their life. It's in a very remote location that few people get to go to. So this is the Jago River Valley in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. This area is extremely remote. You can only get here by helicopter or bush plane. And this is halfway between the Arctic Ocean and the Brooks Mountain Range, which you can see in the background. This is our field camp. We were completely reliant on ourselves out there for about 2 weeks. You can see the landscape is very open and treeless. And because we're at such high latitudes, the sun never sets. I just wanted to include this because I think it's really interesting. I was warned about this before going up there, but you can't really picture it until you're there in person. So this is what the lighting looks like at about 1 in the morning. So long shadows, but still extremely bright out. Because we're above the Arctic Circle and the ground is made of permafrost, the plants are all very dwarfed, but there's still willows and plants that produce flowers and berries, moss, and lichen. They're just very small. Some of the areas are very flat and others are full of these tall tussocks of grass that have a very soggy, wet bottom to them. And these tall tussocks are the stuff that whimbrel love to nest in. And at this point in their life, whimbrel are eating those little tiny berries. So I have not had the opportunity to actually see Whimbrel display on the nesting grounds. By the time we got there, they had already had eggs laid, but when the male Whimbrel displays, it's flying extremely high in the air, like 1,000 feet, flying in large circles, gliding downward while calling, and then climbing back up to do it all again. So it's this very elaborate display. Both sexes incubate. They also have pair bonding, and then they defend their nest quite well. They lay between 2 and 4 of these gorgeous emerald colored eggs. And then, yeah, I wanted to show you this video as well. This is a very intimate video of a Whimbrel on its nest. I just love this video, especially that little shimmy at the end. Um, and so while this bird is incubating, its mate is either off feeding nearby or sort of acting like a sentinel, looking out for any potential nest predators. So they really work together to protect their nest. Now, once the eggs are laid, the pair incubates that nest for about 1 month. And that's a super long time to defend against everything that wants to eat your eggs. So it's a pretty challenging nesting strategy. There are both red and Arctic foxes, there's common ravens, there's Jaegers, and then of course the potential for snow and freezing temperatures. Something that surprised me was that caribou will actually eat the eggs in a nest if they come across it. They're very opportunistic. I actually heard an American golden plover alarm calling in the middle of the night. And I knew that this was a bird that was nesting right next to our camp. So I was kind of concerned. I got out of my tent to see what was going on. And a caribou had its face in the golden plover's nest eating the eggs. So that nest failed, but it really surprised me that caribou would do that. But up in the Arctic, you gotta find food where you can. And then another interesting thing about, shorebirds and Whimbrel specifically is that the chicks, they can leave the nest within 2 hours of hatching. They're just ready to go. They're really good at running and hiding right out of the nest. The chick hatching lines up really well with the insect emergence. So this is something that could be, a potential implication of climate change if those things are mismatched. But essentially, you've heard about all these black flies and mosquitoes that emerge up in the Arctic in the summertime, and these chicks are taking advantage of that, eating all of that abundance of food. Whimbrel are really interesting in that the females leave the nesting grounds first. So let's say they have a successful nest. The females are gonna stay for just maybe a few days and then take off. The males will stay with the chicks for a little while, but then they'll leave too. And the chicks are left sometimes flightless still on their own in order to survive and then find their own way to their first southbound stopover south site. So pretty amazing that they're able to survive. All the while, there's also predators up there like deer falcons and other things. Okay, the incubation period is when we were there working, and we were catching adults to attach transmitters on to learn more about their movements on the nesting grounds. This is the best time to trap the birds up there because they're so tied to their nest. We do it very safely by replacing the real eggs with fake eggs so that the birds don't smash them while we're releasing the trap over top of it. We also do things like float the eggs to tell how far along those eggs are. We put a temperature probe inside of the nest so that we can know the exact date that nest fails, if it does fail. And then, yeah, the working up in the Arctic is amazing, but there are also a lot of challenges, as you can imagine. This is the Jago River that we had to cross several times a day. So this river could be raging at times. And so we were wearing waders, chest-high waders, but in order to safely cross, we had to sort of form this human tripod with linked arms in order to cross safely. So lots of challenges there, as well as grizzly bears. This is something that we train for. We make sure that we have good aim with our shotgun before we get up there and get all the bear training. But we did see several bears while up there. Big grizzly bears. This one on the right is actually a bear that was actively charging at our camp. And my colleague had the nerve to snap a photo before getting our bear deterrents out. So that's what you're looking at right there. But we were able to use our voices and safely scare that bear away. Okay, so that was a whole lot, but that's the nesting time period of a whimbrel. On to their fall stopover. So here we're looking at Hudson Bay. This is an area where a lot of birds will stop right after nesting. They're probably pretty exhausted from nesting and are looking to fill up on food. So this is what it looks like on the ground at Hudson Bay. These pictures I took in Churchill. I happened to go up there for more of a personal trip to see polar bears and beluga whales, but I did see Whimbrel along the way. And this is kind of what that looks like. A bit more shrubby, lots of berries and flowers, more rocks, but still very open, not too different from their nesting grounds. And then that truck down there, that's just the only real safe way to navigate in this area due to polar bears. You have to get in one of these giant trucks. All right, moving on, we've got Cape Cod. So the Whimbrel will then move to the East Coast, sort of New England, Canadian Maritimes area. I'm using Cape Cod as sort of an example, but the birds do spread out in this area. Cape Cod is an area where I've done some work and have some photos from, and is an area where you'll see Whimbrel. So this is a spot that's also really important because birds are going to be crossing the Atlantic Ocean. So they need to really fuel up in this time of year and make sure they're ready before they make that jump. They also have potential for hurricanes that birds might encounter along the way. So they really need to have as much fat store as they can in case they need to head back to land. Okay, and then the birds they might just fly all the way to Brazil, or they might stop in the French Caribbean. So there's all these islands here that the birds might take advantage of and land, which might seem like, hey, that's paradise. What a nice little vacation. But to a whimbrel and other shorebirds, it can be quite dangerous. So hunting does occur in these places. Some places it's legally hunted, other places there's no regulations. And so there's a lot of folks working on this to change this, but we do think that this is a limiting factor for whimbrel. A study showed that 37,000 shorebirds were harvested at just 2 sites during one fall. So huge numbers of birds are being killed there. And then finally, the birds make it to Brazil. So this is the place where they're going to be spending most of their time through the year. This is going to be approximately December through March that they're here. And the landscape is quite different from any other place that I've showed you so far. So they actually hang out in these mangrove forests. And the mangroves are quite tall and dark and wooded, and it's just a lot different. So these birds are hanging out in these basically forests for the winter, especially at high tide when they're not feeding. All right, and then so the birds will stay there for several months, and then they'll start thinking about leaving for Texas. So that flight from Brazil to Texas is oftentimes nonstop, and it can take up to 3 days direct flight. So pretty incredible journey, and hopefully Texas has all the resources that they need when they land. Okay, so that kind of wraps up the Whimbrel part of my talk. I wanted to leave you with a way that you can help shorebirds. I talked a lot about how they're declining, a little depressing, but what can you do to help? Well, I talked about lack of data a lot. So we have this citizen science initiative called the International Shorebird Survey. We call it ISS for short. Most bird counts, like the Christmas bird count and breeding bird surveys, are actively trying to avoid the migratory period. And that's a problem for shorebirds. Shorebirds are migrating most of the year, so we really need to count them during those periods. So this ISS is a way for us to increase shorebird data and use that data to determine population numbers and trends. So anyone that has the basic ability to identify shorebirds can participate in this. We have an ISS mapping tool that can be used to help you find a site, or you can just pick a site near you that you know hosts shorebirds. And then once you find your site near you that hosts shorebirds, we ask that you visit that site a minimum of 3 times in the spring and 3 times in the fall. I've got the seasons listed here. And then just count all the shorebirds you see. You can count all the birds you see, that's fine too. But we make it really easy. You can use the eBird app to submit your data. You just choose project before you start, and that will allow you to select ISS. I do offer much more in-depth trainings on shorebird ID and can even go out with people for the first time for their survey if they want, depending on, how far you are from me. But yeah, if you're interested in helping with this, I'd really encourage you to reach out to me and let me know. We'll send you some swag as well for participating. And it's just a really neat way to help shorebirds. Okay, and with that, I am gonna say thank you, and I can take any questions that you guys might have.
Thanks. There were a couple of questions online while you were talking. You did answer why we see Whimbrels more often here in Texas in the springtime. It was due to the wind flows. Although I noticed on your return map, there were birds that were coming down the Rockies and then along the coastline and then back across the northern coast of South America, as well as the ones that were coming down from Providence area and Cape Cod. So they do apparently also migrate south across this, right?
Generally not through the mid-continent, but they will kind of follow the eastern shore down sometimes. And then we also have, it's really interesting, I didn't get into it, but there are Whimbrel that are nesting in the same place where the male will go down the Pacific flyway south and the female will go down the Atlantic flyway south. So we're still learning a lot about Whimbrel, honestly, in their migrations and all of that. So still a lot of unknowns, but yeah, they do a lot of different things. You can see Whimbrel here in Texas in the winter, and those are often, we believe, subadult birds that are just not going all the way north to nest.
And another question was the she's seen Whimbrels on South Padre Island and Laguna Atascasa. Were they accidentals? Are they protected in their winter grounds in Brazil? And are they sexually dimorphic?
Yeah, great question. So the question about the valley, so South Padre and Laguna Atascosa, that's a great question. So we actually, my first year or two, we went down there in the spring to the valley to try to do a census of Whimbrel because we had an idea that that could be another staging site, kind of separate from the upper Texas coast. And we didn't find huge congregations of them there, but they are there in somewhat high numbers. They're just really spread out from what we could tell. So I believe there is a staging site there, but the concentrations, the larger groups may be south of the border where we aren't able to check. So not accidentals. You definitely saw Whimbrel. Are they protected in their winter grounds in Brazil? So that's a good question. We have colleagues in Brazil that are working on just that, speaking to representatives, the state, and the government there working on their protection. So I don't know the specifics of what their protected status is, but folks are working on getting that done. They are not easy to sex, I would say. In general, we say that the females have a heavier body weight, but we are still hesitant to call sex. So right now, we're kind of saying that that's unknown, still learning more about it, but they generally look very similar.
Any questions in the room?
Jim,
Joy?
I just want to say I have a whole new respect for crossing a river multiple times a day and fending off bears while you're trying to do your job.
Yes, it is a different world up there. It's a huge challenge. I'm going back this summer too, so to a different river that I think is not as big. So, but we're gonna bring a pack raft just in case.
Are they hunted for food or just sport?
Yeah, both. There are these shooting swamps down there where some of it is just for sport. But they're also sold in the markets, like the photos you saw. So people are purchasing them for meat, and then also subsistence hunting is going on.
What is the altitude that they're
You have to speak up.
altitude of flight?
The altitude of flight.
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head. Generally, when they're flying over the ocean, they're going to be flying fairly low to reduce the drag. And then when they're over land, they're flying pretty high. I can't give you an exact number, but they are flying fairly high. Yeah, so sorry. I can find that number if you want, but not off the top of my head.
Also, well, you could probably put this in the chat section when you get a chance. Somebody's asking for your contact info again. And also one more question about, do both sexes incubate, and how can you tell that the females leave first?
Oh, good question. Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of this sort of demography stuff that we know, these are things that the scientists who have studied them for years have kind of relayed to me as information. So that is a really good question, though. How do we know if they're hard to sex? Yeah. I know that the juveniles, they come through the east, like Cape Cod area at a completely different time. So we're actually catching them in Cape Cod to put transmitters on and see what they do in their first year in Brazil. And so that's really easy. We know that they're all juveniles because they're super late. It's really late in the migration that we see them coming through. So it's very segregated. But I imagine a lot of it is probably just observations, personal observation.
Okay. Any more questions in the room? Yes.
I have a question. What is the high and the low temperature in the Arctic when the birds are migrating, especially at 1 o'clock in the morning?
She's asking what were the temperatures while you were camped out?
Yeah, it's super variable. So the summer I was there where that photo was taken, it was actually really warm. So it was probably 50 degrees, which is actually too warm. It was abnormally warm. So, you're walking around in waders and it's quite hot. But then there's other summers where it's below freezing, super windy, and snowing. So it's really variable. Summer can be really late or really early, depending on the year.
Any more? Yes.
Just thought of this. What about, is that area where they are in the Arctic, is that where they're proposing to drill?
Yeah, that's been a huge issue for many years. Yes, that is a threat for sure. And it's something that we've got studies going on in the National Petroleum Reserve with audio recorders to try to get a sense of what sort of impact that drilling would have on shorebirds in that area. So we've, aside from our Whimbrel work, we've also got these surveys that are going across the entire Arctic for shorebirds. And so that data hopefully will inform these political decisions, but not always guaranteed, as you might know.
And I see Grace Darling would like to join you.
Yeah, yeah. If anyone is, in the Upper Coast area in April, you might see us out there working.
Oh, okay.
And you're welcome to join us for a roost count. Yeah, and my email address is swolf@manomet.org. I put it in the chat here, but just for the folks that are in person, feel free to reach out to me.
Well, very, very interesting. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Lights.